All right, welcome to Culture Couch Live. We got James, we got Carly, and we got Jared Murphy. G'day, guys. How are we all?
Hi, Ruzi. How are you, mates?
Good.
Good, very, very good. Everyone's well and up and about, which is good. Hey, I'm not going to read this. It's a pretty long question, so I'm not going to read the whole question. So, do you mind if I paraphrase it? Do you know what paraphrase means, you guys?
No, yes. But I'd like you to spell it.
Actually, I went to Donvale High School, so I'm a public school boy, and English wasn't my best subject. Now, I don't know whether you guys have picked that up, but paraphrasing.
I have noticed it.
I thought computer science might have been your worst subject.
They didn't have computers back then, Carly. Anyway, hey, listen. So this gentleman just arrived. He's a new CEO. He's coming from London to Sydney. And I believe he's talking to a mate who follows the Sydney Swans. And he really, the question is around how does sport make such significant and long-lasting change? Obviously, his mate's a Swan supporter. And for those of you who don't know, Sydney, I don't know, Murph, probably only missed the finals 3 times in the last 20-something years, and 5 grand finals, 2 premierships. But the question really is, how does sport make such quick and long-lasting changes compared to the corporate world, which is, I mean, it's probably something we've touched on, but we've never really gone into the sport in one Culture Couch Live. So Murph, probably start with you, given your association with Geelong and a lot of other footy clubs over the last, and also heading to London, et cetera, and working with other sports. So just simply to start, what do you think the main differences are between the sporting environment and the corporate world?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned London, mate, because I was lucky enough to work in the EPL and talk about get things wrong there. So you can learn a lot from where teams aren't doing it well. But fundamentally, I think the difference is that with sport, there's a huge focus day in, day out. In fact, 24/7 on the performance of the coach, the players, the organisation, the team. So because of that media focus, they're really forced to drive performance and make changes. And we often say even the teams that aren't going that well are still trying things to improve on the basis that they know that they're going to be evaluated every single day in the media, whether it's television, whether it's social media, whether it's radio, whether it's newspapers. So I think that's the key difference initially, because we always say, imagine if this meeting was being reported on in the Herald, back of the Herald Sun, like, would our behaviour change? The answer is probably yes, because you know that your performance is going to be evaluated. So I think that's what really drives it from a performance perspective. And then there's a whole range of things obviously we can pick on. But what that means fundamentally is that the teams review, as you know, like they spend days reviewing, post game for the coaches, post game for the leaders, post game for the full team, post game for the lines, player to player, coach to coach. So the review process is so powerful and so significant. So everyone's constantly talking about how can we get better. And I think what that does is that drives a whole range of other things. So that'd be the first place I'd start. I'll hand back to you and to Carly and to James as well. But I think
we'll get into the systems, Murph. I reckon you're right. So there's a couple of good starting points, and then we'll get onto the bond a bit and talk about the systems. But Carly, I want to ask you, because probably as a little bit, I know Ben's a nutcase, dog supporter, so you've probably seen him throw the shoe through the television and all that sort of stuff. But someone's that's somewhat distanced from sport, but working a lot now with Murph and I, and hearing my keynotes and hearing Murph talk about the time at Geelong. Is there anything that sort of surprised you and stood out in those workshops that you sort of go, I never really experienced that in my workplace before, and that makes sense?
Yeah, the two things are, as a difference to corporate, is the review process that Murph's already mentioned. So I remember running my business, and we were, told by the parent company there must be 2 formal reviews a year, and you must fill out this paperwork and you must do this process. And for me to get my team to actually schedule those reviews, complete the meetings, do the paperwork was so arduous. And people just really, it was the bottom of their pile. So, you know, when Murph's saying Monday we review, Tuesday review, Wednesday we review, you know, in the corporate setting, you ask people to review and they go, oh, what for? I don't really want to do it. So the importance of the review and the prioritization of the review, I think for me is quite eye-opening in terms of where it should sit in the pecking order, but also the frequency of it. So, you know, you always have catch-up meetings, but just actually framing them as, you know, check-ins or reviews or where are things at, how can we help each other, and actually making sure that there's always that constant touch point. I think in corporate you do it ad hoc, but people don't intentionally do it as a check-in and a feedback loop. And I think that's something that's we can really learn and take more forcefully through the corporate world. Absolutely.
And as a consequence of that, Ruzi, as well, isn't it, that the conversation, it's not seen as feedback, is it just becomes conversations because you are reviewing so constantly. Then people just start to have these conversations about, hey, you're doing that really well, or this is how we can get better. And so it becomes quite habitual that you have those conversations, particularly in high-performing teams.
But then the other end of the corporate performance review process is that it gets quite litigious and you have to start recording everything and documenting everything. And if you document every single conversation you have with every single person, like, it just drives you crazy. So there's two extremes of where you need to go with it, I think.
Yeah, but that can't become an excuse not to do it, Carly. Like, I think CEOs and senior managers, we make excuses. We're busy, we haven't got time, you know, whatever. I've got to document. We make excuses not to have those conversations. And
I think Murph, you're right, because we know culture's about actions. And you and I walked into a footy club at 17, so I was used to having conversations at 17. So you and I would talk about this all the time in workshops. At a footy club, they're not necessarily called, how do we have difficult conversations in the corporate world is often comes up. In a footy club, they're conversations, you know, which is really, really, so it's what you're used to when you walk in an organization. And James, I mean, navigating the two worlds, obviously your business world with your business background, but you've also had a really healthy, you know, with amateur sport and tennis and all that sort of stuff. What are the main takeaways for you when you're navigating both those worlds?
In the footy club, you could really feel the change immediately because you're talking about behaviours, and behaviours were easy to shift given that win-loss each week. In the bigger corporate, behaviour was less of a focus because there was a lot of sticky revenue. There's a lot of legacy stuff that would drive performance for the bank year in and year out. And behaviours were less of a focus, and the performance appraisals were more of a process that was ticked and flicked and not really generating feedback or real talk, as we call it. So they were the two differences, that it was slower to shift. Just it wasn't as ingrained as a must do. You must have this feedback loop created and continuing to cycle through, because you just had so much revenue coming off the back of legacy. I'm not sure what it's like in startups and smaller business, you know, in the here and now, but, you know, gee, it can add so much value if they can incorporate real talk into the daily rhythm. It doesn't become confrontational. It becomes so helpful and instructive to drive business forward.
But
so,
you raise another excuse that businesses make, James.
Absolutely.
In terms of, like, they always say, oh, the football club's got the premiership to aim for at the end of the year. Like, that's a load of crap. Like, the truth about it is, the great clubs, they don't win premierships every year. They win them, you know, their goal is to make the finals, finish top four, and to win a premiership every now and again. And so the truth about it is, it's the process, isn't it, Ruzi? It's not about, so business is saying, oh yeah, we don't have the premiership at the end of the year. Yeah, you do. You've got your budgets. And you've got your retention, you've got your engagement, you've got all those same things that you have to achieve. So I think that becomes another excuse for people to say, oh yeah, we're different, and it's an excuse not to follow some of the same principles that we talk about.
Absolutely agree, Jez. Totally. I think that's where the shift has to happen. It's got to become just part of the fabric. Oh, here we are. I've sat here today, Carly, done a self-reflection form, my monthly self-reflection form. That rhythm could even be faster, but it's a great practice and a great habit for us to drive our business forward with more conversation more often.
So my question to you then, Jez, is if we experience a lot of these businesses and a lot of these leaders making excuses on why they're not focusing on these cultural/performance elements, how can we get them to understand the value of it quicker?
Well, I think it's a really interesting concept because it goes to who owns the culture. And so, and Ruzi's best place to talk about this, but if the leader thinks that they have to do it, they have to drive it, they have to be the person that makes everything happen, then in essence, that prevents the team owning the culture, and it reduces the amount of safety, and people then leave it up to the leader, because why wouldn't you? And I think, Ruzi, you can talk to this most about the transformation that took place at Sydney and why that happened and what it meant when the team, or you were prepared to actually let the team own the culture.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, Jez. I mean, for me, it was a real leap of faith. And to be honest, I went into it not really knowing the outcome, but having a real goal that I wanted to achieve. And that was the goal of everyone owning the culture and saying, this is everyone. This is not my culture. This is everyone's culture. What do you want to achieve? And I could never understand as a player why, and I was captain of Fitzroy and went to Sydney as a senior player. I could never understand why I've never asked what I want the footy club to become. It was sort of a strange. So once I established that as a leader saying, this is what I want to do, then the next stage is the process. How do you actually get the process right? So we were able to do that in Sydney. The reason I want to fast forward it is because you made a really good point, Jez. And I want to pick this up, Carly, what you've said, and a bit on you, Macca. There's just not enough urgency in the corporate world. I took on Melbourne Footy Club. They won 2 games and lost 20 the year before. Okay. Now, if that's a business and it's losing $50 million a year, let's say, that CEO's got 4, 5, 6 years to turn that business around. So there's not a great urgency to do it. I mean, Jez, you probably remember, like the urgency for Melbourne to do it once I came there is immediate. Now that's not to say it happens immediately, but within 3 years, we went from 2 to 10 wins. And honestly, a lot of it is due to the immediacy, the public nature of it. And then you have to action things. You can't, and I talk about this all the time, you can never ring up the AFL. And I had a great relationship with the AFL, as everyone knows, but I could never ring up the AFL and go, hey, listen, Andrew, we're not ready to play at 1:10 on Saturday. Can we just move that back a week? And I reckon Murphy hit on it before. That's why I think it's an excuse in the corporate world. Oh, yeah, but you play every week. Yeah, we play every week, but we have a process that we go through every single week. That's the most important part of it. And I think that's the biggest difference that I see in a footy club. So forget all the other white noise and, you have a grand final and we don't want to have, performance reviews because we've got too much to do and I'm busy and all that sort of stuff. The processes are dramatically different and the investment in people is dramatically different. And I think that's what I see in the corporate world. And maybe it's a good segue into some of the processes that we try and put in place. And I think, Carly, that's probably the most important thing, because if we bring the two together, which there's a lot of synergy, what are some of the processes that you would encourage the businesses to take out of what sport does? Because I think let's just get under the bonnet for the next 5 minutes and say, well, you should be doing this, 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 and this.
I think it's really interesting because I read an article the other day about busy work. So, old managers, 20 years ago, if they looked around the office and they see some people not, feverishly at their desk, so, okay, you must not be busy and I need 100% of your time filled if I'm paying you. So here's a job to do just to get stuff done. Whereas the focus on relationships is not always there. And so you think, that person's going for a coffee with that person, they're wasting time, I'm paying them for that time. But we're not actually putting that emphasis on to get better outcomes and to get more efficient, we need to have really strong relationships with each other, and we need to invest time in that. So I think the perception in the old days of wasting time chatting and building relationships and spending time together as opposed to actually doing stuff is a real misconception that I think we need, the corporate world now needs to really have a think about how we develop that. And, the processes we put in place around that in the check-ins and the meeting kickoffs and some of those systems that we put in place, I think are super helpful with that. But just that misconception is really quite interesting from that point of view.
There's a couple of things. Oh, sorry, Ruthie. There's a couple of things in there, Carly, which I think are worth just pulling out. The first one is when you get promoted from a senior manager to a, further an executive or even a CEO position, you're still able to do your job. Mm-hmm. And so people can still default to doing their job, and they get caught being busy instead of managing the people. When you retire from the game and you become a coach, you can't go and play. Yeah. And so you then have to find ways to influence the performance of the group without being able to go and do it. And I think that leads to the second point, which I think is really relevant, is the investment in coaching and development so recruiting high performance people, and then the absolute investment in helping them to be the best they can be, because you have such a limited time, don't you, Rizzy? Like these athletes come in at, say, 18. If they haven't developed quickly enough by 23, 24, they're gone. And so we as an organisation have to invest really heavily in fast tracking their development, both as performers and as leaders within the team, in order for us to perform. So I don't think we coach enough. We don't identify emerging leaders. We don't give them meaningful roles in terms of developing their leadership. And we get caught doing in the business ourselves, doing the business as leaders. So I think there's two fundamental differences there.
Yeah, 100%. And for you, James, what are some of the systems to help those CEOs, those leaders out there, just pull that gap closer between a high-performing sporting organisation and a business?
I think, well, Jez touched on it before, like the better you can devolve the ownership of culture, there's more safety and trust comes from that for people within the team, where they're feeling that they're safe to speak up and they're trusted for their view. There's better role clarity around purpose. All of those things lead to escalation of issues faster, dealing with issues faster, having feedback loops created that are listened to, meaningful and valued. And I think they're the things that come out of our process that can have immediate impact in corporates right now. It's giving that sense that you should be comfortable. I own this culture along with my teammates to have a voice and to affect change. But also you're getting good feedback yourself. So your behavior starts to shift. You create new habits for yourself. And that then can lead to role modeling those. But it just feeds on itself, Rosie, but it comes back to a leaders allowing the team to own the culture. If they're hearing their own voice talk the whole time, then they've got it wrong.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I mean, we could touch on this for ages. It's a great conversation, a great question. It lends itself to that. But I might just finish off with something. It's also the cadence, Murph, isn't it? I mean, you're working with North Melbourne at the moment. Give us ballpark figure how many times you've been in that club, and then even our best corporates, it's so much less time and commit. Now there's differences, and we do acknowledge the differences, but it's also the cadence, isn't it, of the commitment to culture, which is huge.
Yeah, it's about weekly, so making sure that this you're in there weekly. You're talking to the coaches, the leaders, the emerging leaders, the senior players that aren't in the leadership group, the first and second year players. So it's about just making sure you're touching all of those on development. And probably the last thing I want to finish off with, Ruzi, in terms of it's a point you make all the time, is the team focus. So it's not about the finance versus marketing versus IT, like the cross-functional collaboration between the backs, the mids, the forwards, like where if they don't function together, if we're not connected across the field, the pitch, whatever we're playing on the court, then if we're not connected, we're in trouble. It's so obvious. Whereas, again, so often in business, you don't see cross-functional collaboration and communication. And so as a result, you have senior leaders of divisions like managing their teams as opposed to taking an enterprise perspective and working together. Like I know it drives you insane when we go into work with executive teams about that.
It's funny, we often stop, don't we, about 20, 30 minutes in, and we ask the question. It's a really simple question. Do you see yourselves as a team? And you can literally see the air come out of the room, and people then think, and thankfully, the answer is always yes. Yeah. But it's an interesting moment for them, isn't it? Because they've still got their marketing hat on and their IT hat on and their sales hat on, and they're going into bat for what they see as their team, but they don't see the broader team, which is really fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it just goes on, and so it's probably a really good spot, to sort of start to wind it up. Is as a CEO or senior manager, is your team functioning as a team, or is it functioning as a group of silos or a group of divisions? And then if it is, how are you going to change that? What are some of the things you can put in place? And how can you empower your team? Who owns the culture? Like, it's such a good question.
Yeah, 100%. No, that was awesome. Good question, good discussion, and probably we haven't delved into too heavily on the Culture Cast Live. We've touched on a lot of the concepts around sport, but hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea around why sport can make a relatively quick change because of the absolute commitment to culture and the pressure. There's not too many coaches that pick up long superannuation checks, Macca. So most of them.
No, you're either about to be sacked or you've just been sacked. Isn't that the way it goes?
Normally, that's the way it happens. But no, thanks very much. Great Culture Cast Live. Thanks, Macca. Thanks, Carly. Thanks, Mert. We'll see you all next week on Culture Cast Live.